Hello there, welcome back to the Particle Measuring Systems podcast. My name is Hugo, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Mark Halworth about our environmental risk assessments. Welcome, Mark.
Hello, welcome everybody.
So, Mark, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have a general idea of a risk assessment or a working knowledge of how a risk assessment is performed. In my experience, I think the particle measuring systems method is executed a bit differently. Could you give a brief overview of what the PMS risk assessment consists of?
Most people know what a risk assessment sort of looks like from a 30,000 foot view.
Yeah.
And moreover, it's where we bring our expertise to the front is around environmental monitoring systems. So every process within a pharmaceutical application needs a risk assessment of some sort. But when you're looking at pharmaceutical environmental monitoring, it takes on a slightly different vein. And that is because when you start to assess the risk itself, there's a couple of characteristics that you can almost leapfrog over. And that's because, when you start to think about a risk assessment, there's severity. Well, we don't have to monitor severity or start to weigh severity, because in an aseptic process, everything is critical, everything is severe. You have the probability of something occurring, and that's where we start to drill into what the probabilities of a contamination event are. And then finally, you have the detectability. Well, what we're talking about is a monitoring system, and monitoring systems are inherently the detection device. You can sort of not necessarily ignore, but accept as critical the severity and the detectability and focus more on the probability. So when we start to look at our risk assessments, probability is really where it's at. And to define that probability, you have to have a good understanding of the material flow, the personnel flow, the process itself, and the SOPs that occur within the room. And step one is to look at the clean room certification data. Now, when you look at the clean room certification data, you look at it with a slightly different eye. What we're looking for now isn't necessarily the raw numbers themselves, but it's to make sure that the clean room is uniformly clean. Is it of a uniform dispersion of particles within that area, whether it be in a ISO 7, ISO 8, or in the ISO 5 unidirectional flow? You're trying to make sure that there are no hotspots, and that's obviously an immediate sign that there might be a risk. And if there are hotspots, worst case scenarios, if you will, and that's a phrase that people love to knock around. If you have a worst case scenario, fix it before the risk assessment. If it's immediately recognized as a problem, don't let it live there as a problem and go, well, we'll just monitor it to see if it gets any worse. Fix it. The risk assessments, what we're trying to do is to help fine tune, as you alluded to, Hugo, what they already know and understand.
Right.
But the regulations require, they've got quite specific about it now, a documented risk assessment as to what the risks are. So we focus in on the probability, and then to do that, we try to look for the critical control points. So, we break an area up into functional tasks. So, this is the entrance, this is the process, this is the point of fill, this is capping. Break out all the big parts within a process, start to describe those areas, drill into it a little bit more, and identify the critical control points within them. And once you've identified those critical control points, we're able to start scoring them. So are they exposed to operators? Are the materials exposed to the environment? Is the process exposed to the environment? These are all high probability. But then there's also the subtle bits. Could an operator knock the probe accidentally doing their usual tasks? And if they can, you're going to get a false positive, and that doesn't do anybody any favors. So that's why reviewing the process and looking at the operators performing their tasks, as you know, because you've done them with me,
Yes.
it becomes really important to see how the operators work in the clean room, because there could be half a dozen risks that you can solve by just letting them know, if your operator was to stand 3 steps to the left, you wouldn't be getting all the hits you were getting.
It would absolve a whole lot of problems that you're having when it comes to the hits. So
Yeah, absolutely. Once you've identified critical control points and looked at all the variables, we then establish the location. And that's where most customers ask us to come in, is where do I monitor? And that's probably the number one question we're asked when supplying both portable instruments and the continuous monitoring systems that we provide. When you're faced with an ocean of data, because these are produced data every minute of every hour of every day, what do we do? How do we make that data relevant? Well, the relevancy comes from picking the right place. It kind of takes it all the way back to first principles. Once you've found that right location, which we determine and demonstrate through risk assessment, 20 years ago when I started this, they were pretty obvious. It was the point of fill and the stoppering and the capping points and the accumulators. But now there's a requirement for a fully documented risk assessment. And it's that demonstration of the documentation that really validates what we do and why we do it.
well, speaking of data, and I probably was skipping ahead, was some other things I wanted to mention, but you mentioned data quality more so than quantity. And how do you think that our risk assessments support this approach?
You can take an ocean of data, and it's
Right.
trying to bear relevancy to that data. I could go into a clean room once per month and take a sample at 30 locations. But the data from one location 30 times over the month may well give me a better impression as to what I'm looking for. And our risk assessment identifies that difference. There are some processes where a lot of individual sample points over once per month reflects what's going on in a very stable environment. So why sample every day?
Or every week, right?
Or every week, or whatever that frequency that
Yes.
the risk assessment puts forward. But there are some places, even in the class ISO 7, ISO 8, grade C, grade D rooms, where a continuous monitoring point in a uniformly distributed environment will give you a really good impression as to what's going on. And so we're able to balance the number of locations versus the frequency, and that what then leads to the quality of data. It ties to the actual risks that are present for the process. And that's different in every room. It's not just one where we can get a broad brush and we paint it all over any facility anywhere. It becomes quite specific and unique to the facility, to the room. And that's why we need to try and control operators, because a rogue operator doing what they think is right rather than what they know is right is biggest random variable that we invite
Right.
into our clean room of the operators, and are also the biggest source of contamination. So it's trying to use the data to demonstrate to the operators as well as to management and to the regulators that the environment in which your process was made is under good control, not just control.
And it's giving a genuine reflection of what's actually occurring in the room, not with
Exactly.
false positives and extra
Yeah,
points that don't have any genuine meaning, or add meaningful data to what's going on in the room.
and that's it. And that's why the ability to identify an N of M. So if somebody opens the door, you're going to lose pressure. That's a natural kind of side effect of doors, and positive pressure gateways. But is it a bad thing? Well, how else are the operators going to get in? We're not quite Star
Right.
Trekking yet. We can't just beam me into the room, Scotty.
Right.
So doors are a necessary evil, if you will. And therefore, what are the risks associated with transiting that doorway? And the data will let you know whether or not excessive contamination came through that doorway, or if the doorway was working perfectly. Back in the old days, we used to see a lot of sample points mounted right next to the door. That's where the contamination is coming in. But it's not contamination until it's in the room. And again, that's the quality of data, that it's
Right.
understanding the frequency of measurement and the location of measurement. And having done this for over 25 years, we start to recognize where the hot points are.
So with everything we've just discussed, what do you think makes our risk assessments a complement to the other products and services we offer in PMS?
To be honest, we try and be as independent from the products and processes. You know, we're not a sales team up front but obviously we do have some products that particle counters, microbial samplers, FMS systems that go along with all of the environmental monitoring needs that are identified in these processes, plus our inherent knowledge of how the software works. Again, if we go back to data, it's not just the data from these select points that we understand. What needs to be included in the report and this 3-monthly and 6-monthly review of those reports that become kind of, important. So it becomes more of a total solution than a piece of a puzzle. It's, this is the house made of Lego bricks and not just the Lego brick itself. All of these pieces plug together and give you a cohesive message at the very end. And that's where the risk assessment almost catalyzes a lot of those decisions and thought processes. Because if I need a portable instrument, we have access to portable instruments where we know the data meets the need. If you need continuous monitoring, we have access to continuous monitoring systems where we know that knowledge is now built in and designed into the software. So it's not one where we're trying to wrestle information and data out of a process. The process is giving us the data that we need inherently. And these are the symbiosis between the product lines that PMS have and the advisory services that we offer. These risk assessments is they fit together like 5 fingers in a glove.
I'm glad you mentioned that, especially the part where advisory services works as a complement and also independently, because someone listening to this may think that our risk assessments might cater too much to an internal methodology of contamination control or an environmental strategy that's driven by our products and this other services that we offer. So what would you tell a customer about our risk assessments and how we keep it updated to meet current regulations and good manufacturing practices?
Yeah, it's actually a question that came up with a customer only last week. And it's one of those where the regulations, even though they're open to interpretation, are relatively succinct in what they expect. And if our products deliver to that expectation, brilliant. We're not used car salesmen trying to sell a clunker. It's one where we have top quality products that meet some very stringent demands of a regulatory agency that are trying to protect human health. So we serve no better client than our customers in trying to support their activities in delivering good products to protect human health. And that's why we both do this job. That's why we both love this job.
Yeah.
And there's meaning to what we do and how we do it. It's not imposing a regime of too many sample points, because too much data can be a dangerous thing too.
Yes.
It's that balance between what do I need and what do the regulators need to see to demonstrate control over the environment. It's not necessarily control over finished drug product quality. This is control over the environment in which drug products are manufactured. And there are some pretty stringent rules and guidelines that are out there for us to follow. And systems that we installed 10, 15, 20 years ago are still in use today, following the same tried and tested methodologies that we employ right now. So it's one where the regulations might change, but the intent of environmental monitoring, true environmental monitoring, hasn't.
And I think that's a testament to how passionate and how invested we are to make sure that we're offering genuine environmental monitoring of a top-notch level.
Exactly.
Well, Mark, thank you for your time. I appreciate you sitting down with me to share your knowledge. I think this was a very good discussion. Hopefully we can continue it next time.
Always a pleasure, Hugo. You know that.
Thank you.
Cheerio. Bye-bye. Cheerio.
Bye-bye.